Шановні колеги,
Dear colleagues, we continue our work at the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. Our next topic is 3 years of the President, the results of expert interview. Our guests are Iryna Bekeshkina, Director of the Ilko Kucheriv Democratic Initiative Foundation. She'll join us soon. Ihor Koliushko, Chairman of the Center for Political and Legal Reforms. Also Andrii Suharyna, Political Analyst of the Ilko Kucheriv Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Oleksandr Sushko, Research Director of the Institute for Euro-Atlantic Cooperation. And Volodymyr Fesenko, Head of the Center for Applied Political Studies, Penta. The first will be Andrii Suharyna. He will present the results of the research. Thank you very much for the given floor. And while Iryna Bekeshkina is joining us, I will start with the expert interview. Maybe it's a tradition that 3 years running we are making an expert interview of how experts, journalists and politologists evaluate Petro Poroshenko's activity as the president of Ukraine. And the expert result was 4.5 scores according to the 10 scale. 10 score scale, and the result is 3 with a great minus. The results are lower than the results on the first year. What are the elements to form this evaluation? The largest Poroshenko's largest achievements for his third year in his position are foreign political activities, and almost all the experts pointed it. This is the end of this visa-free story, actually providing Ukraine with visa-free regime by the European Union. This is the most important thing. The second is the foreign political component. This is the conservation of the anti-Russian coalition, continuation of sanctions against the Russian Federation, and then we can talk about some internal political things like intensification and consolidation of the defense capacity and mobilization of the political area, and some stabilization of the situation in the front line. Other things are also rather important, like implementation of the electronic or e-declaration. They are half measures at a certain extent. When we speak about failures, now they continue from year to year. What we saw during the first year, the second year, they remained during the third year. Again, we talk about the fact that Poroshenko is failing to fight corruption, and it's also only a declaration, and the reform rate is rather slow. So, and the situation in Donbass doesn't see a logical ending, and also, according to the experts, this Poroshenko's policy gets rather low average indicators. When we looked at various areas, how Poroshenko succeeded in the foreign policy, in the staff formation policy during the previous year, a considerable change of indicators was noticed only in one aspect. This is the communication with the government, also a change of the personnel and change of the management, and the fact that the communication with the government has improved. Poroshenko gets the highest scores for his foreign policy, and in principle he succeeds in it. When we continue talking about the failures, there is another important item missing. Previously, this is about certain confrontation with the civil society and probably a certain pressure to the civil society, which was principally estimated negatively. And when we come to the conclusion, to recommendations, then according to the recommendations, again, they repeat again and again, the third year running. This is fighting corruption. It should be this struggle should be more intensified, more systemic, and we are talking about the court reform, which is in principle a final point for establishment of every specific case in the justice. Also, we are talking about the beginning of the election reform, which is necessary to update the law, the legal field, to make it more projectable. I think that it's better to come over to the discussion rather than to focus on the results during the presentation. Thank you. Thank you. You see that this year we have gathered in the same position like we were the previous year and the year before the previous one. And it's very important that the experts assessing Poroshenko's activity during the previous year to voice their opinion. Thank you for the invitation, first of all, and for the opportunity to take part in the discussion. Yes, really, this is, as sociologists say, it's a longitudinal approach when the same people give assessment of a situation in dynamics. This is an important quality method of research. What can be said in this sense? It's very demonstrative what was mentioned by my colleagues, that the majority of remarks still remain. I think this is a serious critical signal to the presidential team that they have to correct problematic things on these vulnerable points and problems mentioned by expert, discovered by expert investigations and interviews. And what about this section we are evaluating? This is a paradox situation. It's quite evident that this year the president has something to be proud of, to present as a result of his positive activity, which is marked in the interview, and everybody sees that this is one of the most important events. This is providing Ukraine with a free regime. Of course, this is a positive result, both and it's quite legally important, equally so important to Poroshenko himself. He has put a lot of personal effort to this, and this was one of his constant promises, and here he has something to show the public and his electorate. And another thing, this is a paradox. If it had happened in 2015, the political effect would have been much larger. But now it's not very vital. Here is the result and the positive, but the effect is not so large as it should have been, might have happened. I don't have to be very hasty, but now it was mentioned that Poroshenko's foreign policy got more positive score estimations, and the Senate is going to ratify probably the association agreement. And it should be mentioned that the president and the Ukrainian diplomacy have played an important role. Maybe he didn't do it, this, but quality of sanctions and the certification of this agreement, and Poroshenko, Yeliseyev, and Minister Klimkin did a lot not to leave this question, to leave it somewhere in the air, but to solve it. And here the situation looks more positive, with more positive results. Main problems in the internal policy. I don't think this is not only Poroshenko's personal problem that he is failing to do something. We have a whole range of factors working here. On the one side, foreign policy is more attractive to Poroshenko, and it's more where he feels more comfortable and more efficient rather than in the internal policy. And how the parliament presidential system is working, the president doesn't formally influence the government activity, but he is trying to do so. And here we also see a paradox. And this year, like during the previous year, Poroshenko has succeeded to ensure the status of the most powerful figure in the political field of Ukraine. It's at the expense of his hyperactivity, personal communication, various instruments of influence. He succeeds in it, and in this respect, he is more efficient than Yushchenko, and in a certain sense, more effective than Yanukovych, who had the presidential parliamentary system of management. But here, it seems to me, we can see factors when the president personally tries to solve many fine, small problems, instead of concentrating on principal strategic directions. And here what was mentioned by my colleagues, we can see a problem of communication with the civil society, and on the issues that were set here are on the questions. Do Ukrainians trust President Poroshenko? How has the level of trust changed? I think that Iryna will answer this question better because she is a sociologist. I can only be based on data of the previous year. This year, these data are not so abundant, but also we see a paradox situation. Most Ukrainians don't trust the president, but they don't trust other political leaders either. This is a principally new complex situation. The president remains among the leaders according to the ratings. And here is an interesting moment that most of his electorate, which I analyzed on several expert interview results. So most of his electorate, potential electorate, don't trust him fully, but they are ready to vote for him. Here is an interesting phenomenon, and he remains among leaders according to the presidential ratings, though ratings have fallen as compared to the first presidential year. Here we can see the crisis of trust, of confidence, but Poroshenko succeeds in maintaining a certain balance. And this year we don't see an evident deterioration like it was the previous year. But there is a problem that we don't see big positive tendencies. And the problem is not that the majority of Ukrainians don't trust him, but we have aggressive mistrust among the Ukrainian society. And the presidential team should think about it. And I already said how the president is managing is coping with his task. And as a rule, during the third year, people think what to do, or the president might think what to do, whether he should position himself to ballot for the second term. What's the difference between the third and the second year? During the third year, there is a necessity to stabilize the situation and to prepare preconditions for further movement forward. To a certain extent, the president has been successful. The change of the government and the prosecutors that stabilized the situation to a certain extent. Though the story with the trade blockade and other stories have demonstrated that public institutions remain weak, and certain problems with social anarchy remain vital. And also, in conclusion, some recommendations here. I will agree to general results of the interview. I also gave similar answers, especially on the foreign policy that we that contacts with the American party have to be activated, intensified, and I think that during the first month or the first and a half months, we'll see a meeting with Mr. Trump, and formalization of certain relationship. But unlike some colleagues who advised the expansion of the Norman format due to the U.S., I'm skeptical. But I think that in the internal policy, the president has to intensify his dialogue with the civil society. And it doesn't only concern a conference with of the president with journalists, meetings, not only to have meetings for the sake of reforms, but to meet people who work in civil society and political sectors to hear their opinion about what should be done next. And the activation of the dialogue with the civil society is one of the main advice or recommendations for the fourth year of the presidential activity. Thank you. Now, Mr. Ihor Koliushko. Probably Alexander, who wants to make his presentation as the main course. I see that we don't have a certain differentiation who will speak about the internal and about the foreign policy is absolutely normal. It's also easier for me to touch upon a wider circle of issues rather than very specific. Undoubtedly, we should recognize that regardless of general unfavorable circumstances, President Poroshenko has succeeded to provide actually the lack of alternative of his own leadership as the institute of the presidential power, and to ensure a relatively acceptable level of ratings. If we compare it with what we had in the past, when during the more favorable circumstances we can remember Viktor Yushchenko, who during his fourth year had much lower ratings than Poroshenko has now. And Yushchenko couldn't think about his repeated election, even theoretically, while Poroshenko can think seriously about being elected twice. And we don't know how we can interpret it. Maybe it's because of the lack of bright candidates, but why we don't have these candidates? It can hardly be called as a result of special actions of the effective authorities. Really, we see that as a result of the selection phase, internal selection phase, inside the political class, currently we don't see many people who can boast of considerable success in the work with the society on generating the public trust. Again, the top positions among politicians see the competition among today's and yesterday's officials, and we don't have any bright figure and even party formation who could enjoy wide public trust. And this is a hypothetical background for the future presidential campaign. Poroshenko can see rather favorable conditions, though he cannot feel any guarantees. The president is really fond of the foreign policy. He is the first president of Ukraine who lives with it, who gets dry from it, and who gets how to say, nourishment with foreign policy. And his success is rather relative, but still it's in place against the background of a certain comparative basis. We can remember, let's say, during the fourth year of his presidential cadence, President Yushchenko couldn't have a 4-year negotiations with the Merkel chancellor. He couldn't, during the second half of his term, he couldn't organize a meeting with her as a result of a specific story. And here the president pays a full-time visit, and he gets full of the working day of the German chancellor and has a rather informative, rather fruitful negotiations. Regardless of a range of claims and questions that foreign partners could have against him, he succeeds in preserving of a friendly position, and he doesn't have, or rather confident position. He doesn't have any dramatic failures, which cannot be said about many components of the internal policy. And here we can say, I don't want to repeat what was mentioned a year ago. That is about the reform rates and the environment and the appointments and various decisions proving the halfness, not of only his policy, but his figure, like his one leg is in the future of the country and one leg is somewhere in the past. But let's say using the modern vocabulary, he remains to be a hybrid figure who confirms confirms his typical figure, the current moment of the modern history. He is a rather demonstrative figure to illustrate the current moment. What appeared this year, and here I'm ready to confirm and to agree to the authors of the interview and with the previous speakers and the experts, what was new against the president. This is appearance and escalation of the conflict with the active part of the civil society. I'm very serious about it and anxious about it, because we don't speak only a certain destruction of the synergy that was formed. That maybe it was situational, but it was formed after the Maidan, when the state and the civil society and best experts cooperated to promote reforms. When certain interesting and often unprecedented forms of the cooperation of the civil society were formed, because of which the power of influence of the Ukrainian civil society achieved rather high level that was recognized both in Ukraine and in the world. And what is happening today, maybe because of certain jealousy, and maybe because of interpersonal contacts, but what is being said in certain power corridors, even somebody uses the term class hate, and I'm very sad about seeing some elements of this conflict. Typical more authoritarian regimes are coming back to us. Here we are talking about very specific legislation about declaration by certain activists, and also strange films that start emerging. Here is, for example, mask show at the International Center of Perspective Studies in April, and also yesterday we saw in the Parliament the presentation of videos that discredit the Center for the Anti-Corruption Center, and so on and so forth. All these things unroll very concisely in time in front of us, and then cast a shadow to the communication of the authorities and the president and the civil society. I think that for me, as for the expert, it will be a very important indicator of his next fourth year. Will these things get their continuation and intensification, or maybe maybe you'll find a way out to the improvement of relations of the authorities and the civil society, and maybe the most successful metaphor for me is President Poroshenko making a split over, like with one leg in the past and one leg in the fixing in the future. I think he also understands his ambivalence, as of a political figure. And all the same, we expect things that one of the legs will overweight. We are afraid that during the last 2 years he will focus on the leg standing in the past, but we hope at the same time that he will make a choice to focus on that maybe shaky, not quite understandable future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And now I agree with the assessment of my colleagues, and I believe that Oleksandr said it correctly about these legs, one in the past, one in the future. Not to repeat what was said, I would like to stress on several things. First, if we assess the activity of the president, we should also take into account the implementation of his constitutional responsibilities. Constitution gives a lot of power to the president in foreign affairs and in defense issues, and the president should pay a lot of attention to these sectors. And there are a lot of positive assessments, and more than in other areas. At the same time, the president has some particular constitutional responsibilities he do not implement. So this is about Central Election Commission. For the third year, they have the same members of the commission, and their term has expired. And in 2014, they prolonged it for 1 month, and it seemed understandable. But why, in 3 years, they didn't nominate other members of CEC? We can't understand this. And this is the constitutional responsibility of the president to implement this. Speaking about CEC, I believe that there is a political role of the president. Election reform is not implemented, and we cannot even see it on the horizon. We tried to draw attention to it by the article in Zerkala newspaper. We speak about it with politicians and experts, and everyone say that president and political powers who support him in the parliament, they do not want to shift to proportional system with open lists. That's why there is no reform. At the same time, they promised it during election, so this is non-implementation, and this is a moment for criticism. Also, there is such a sector where the president has particular responsibilities. This is the activity of the Constitutional Court. From one side, there are a lot of problems connected with the court because changes are put in constitution, but the law on Constitutional Court was not adopted. But this reform was implemented, and the president supported this reform, and it looks like this reform was prepared behind closed doors in Bankova Street. And they should think forward. They should think ahead and prepare the draft law on Constitutional Court. At the same time, we see that when the changes were introduced to the Constitution, in the Rada there was a draft law on Constitutional Court that was criticized heavily, and I believe the criticism was fair. And it happened that in the Supreme Council there is no political will to adopt this draft law. And now Constitutional Court, they do not know whether to deal with constitutional complaints of the citizens. Maybe they will start to do so based on their decision on the regulation, because the law does not provide the procedures. And more complicated issue is that without this law, it is impossible to nominate and replace judges in the Constitutional Court. Soon we will have 13 out of 18 that were envisaged by Constitution, and there is an issue of quorum, of taking decisions in the Constitutional Court. And now these issues are questionable, and we do not see active role of the president in this. And also, we do not see the biggest faction who support the president, that they do enough to improve in this. So also, I would like to say the last one, if we are speaking about assessments, critical professional assessments, I would like to provide. This is about the relationship between the president and political establishment. Simply speaking, I would say that it remains post-Soviet, and there is also some suspected corruption in the methodology of this relationship. There are a lot of condemnations in the parliament. There is political corruption in the parliament. They continue to solve issues, whether to vote or not, based on their friendships. They provide services to one another, and there are presidential decrees. When he goes out of his presidential responsibilities, this practice continues throughout presidency in Ukraine. They had the same sins. And the methodology of the policy of institutional development, unfortunately, here we do not see an active position of the president in the forming of administrative system within the government. Now they have a lot of positive trends there, but still we face the situation when presidential forces do not support some issues, and there is even some opposition from the president towards some issues. So that is, I wanted to add to the analysis made by my colleagues. But on the whole, I agree. If we look closely, there is no alternative to the president that we have now. So there is no need, and I'm surprised if someone calls to re-elect the president to carry out elections. First, we should get prepared to the elections. We should have proposals. We should have good nominations, and only then we will be able to succeed. Unfortunately, I do not see it at the moment. Thank you. I would like to say several words. At the end of last year, when we made conclusions, I said that this was the year when they didn't do much. And the last year of the presidency also was the year of maybe there were some good positive developments, for example, visa-free regime. And if our survey was made before, maybe the results of our research would be worse. And the main achievement of the president is visa-free regime for Ukraine, the reforms in military sphere, relative stabilization in the East. So this is the year of stabilization, but people expected serious reforms that will allow to radically change our society. And about drawbacks in these 3 years, this is corruption, judiciary reform, law enforcement reform. So this remains unchanged in these 3 years, and this is an obstacle to Ukrainian development. And if you read foreign articles, they write a lot about corruption in our country, and there is direct responsibility of the president and prosecutors, because the prosecutors are nominated by the president, and there is a disturbing signal because they do not fight corruption, they fight anti-corruption activists. Why they fight these anti-corruption activists? Because they want to draw attention to corruption. That's why they want to discredit anti-corruption activists, and this is a disturbing signal. I like the analogy about two legs of the president. So they draw him by his two legs. Old Ukraine draws him back, and new Ukraine draws him forward. And where will the president go? He can go any way, but I wish that he would implement reforms and move toward new Ukraine, and we will see this in a year. Do you have questions? Thank you for your presentation. Now introduce yourself and ask questions. Good afternoon, Volodymyr TV. You said that the president reached political influence at a high level. At the same time, the president cannot properly fight corruption and to reach some progress in this. What creates obstacles in this way? Let me try. Your question is exemplary because these are the expectations of society. But fighting corruption is not a responsibility of the president. The only thing he can, through parliamentary deputies, through other governmental bodies, he can promote and help fighting corruption. But this is not his direct responsibility. There was some progress, maybe not due to president, but he didn't create obstacles in this. And during last year, during this third year of the presidency, the story about e-declarations, as I know, some people in power, I won't call them, they torpedoed all the system of e-declarations. They tried to ruin the system. And not only civil society tries to bring our president to the future, but also our international partners, and he tries to keep a balance. The prime minister and the president, they helped to resolve the situation. There are crisis trends, but still they helped. And also the story about Nasirov. As I heard, I cannot confirm this, but what I heard, as in the story of Martynenko, there were addresses to the president. They asked to help the person, and many people who are close to the president, they tried to ask the president to help, but he decided to stay neutral. And maybe he could influence the court, but what were the reasons? We don't know. But he took situation in the society into account at the meetings concerning restriction measures towards Nasirov, and he do not create obstacles. And the relationship between General Prosecutor's Office, NABU, and other law enforcement bodies. Yes, there are some problems inside anti-corruption bodies, but president does not influence on this directly. So these are expectations. We want that the president be a driver to motivate others. And here is a contradiction. He gets involved when he see problems and criticism towards him, he gets involved or he stays neutral, not to be in conflict. And here is a problem. And this is not his responsibility. Formally, he is not who is fighting corruption, but the society expects that he will promote, he will motivate others to do this. But compared with last year, we have some progress this year in this area. Also, you said it correctly about people who are close to the president. You know that they draw him back, but person, he himself, he chooses with whom he works with. So the president does not have constitutional responsibility to fight corruption. But if we look at the president in a broader sense, he is not only the president, he is a political leader of the majority of the parliament, of the biggest faction. And here his responsibility is bigger. And I think about one issue, and I think why we do not have real fight against corruption. I do not have an answer about what reason dominates. So people who are close to the president, maybe they do not believe that this is the main priority and they cannot work in other way. Or the reason can be different. They cannot work in a different way. Like in the parliament, no votes, and you can write the best draft law, you can voice it clearly and promote it, but there is no votes for this and there is no results. So I do not know the situation in such details, whether they cannot, because there is a powerful oligarch and politicians cooperation, and the president cannot oppose this because he will lose power in such a case, or he does not want to do this because he thinks comfortable playing according to the established rules. So we should continue this, investigate this topic in order to establish proper way for the development of Ukraine. I would like to add a third reason. They afraid that the representatives of power can fall the first victims of the new processes. And referring to the leader of the after Maidan, one of they said about so in Hungary they said that the first victims will be you, not corrupt officials, because it is easier to demonstrate when they hit current power, those people who are in power. And in society, people believe that officials in power are corrupt, and these officials, they are afraid. And first, they should feel this threat that they will be punished for corruption. Oligarchs and top officials, they are now afraid of NABU. And this is a restrictive measure. And unfortunately, another motive, it stimulates the deputies and representatives of closer circles to put some limitations. They want to create some limitations for NABU and other investigative bodies. And the president understands they should fight corruption, and Mr. Lutsenko is active, and they try to stimulate the activity of the prosecutor's office. And as they say, they want to go to paradise, but the sins prevent them. So it is easier to fight corruption, and it is more difficult to fight corrupt officials. Boris Bragin, journalist. Dear friends, I would like to remind you at the beginning of the presidential term, the president promised to stop the conflict in the East. But this conflict is not stopped, and I didn't hear this issue here from the experts, and maybe in press release these experts should be stated why they do not say about this. And the second, we cannot speak only about corruption now. This is just distraction of the attention if we compare it with the situation in the East. And also, our speakers speak about lack of alternatives. Can we speak about democracy in society if there is no alternative? I won't mention the countries where things are without alternative. This is negative trend that we do not have alternatives. So first, only 1 out of 5 mentioned about alternatives. This is normal. I would like to add, speaking about lack of alternatives, I said that other political forces did not prepare, in my opinion, better nomination for the position of the president. There are a lot of politicians. In my opinion, they would be much better. But if elections happen tomorrow, I cannot see any percentage in the opportunity to win. So, and others that can win, I believe they are not better than the current president. So this is my opinion about the promise of the president. He said in several months before elections, he said that he will solve the problem in Donbass in several months. So, in order to criticize, first you should know whether he had a chance to solve this problem. He had some opinion on this, and I suspect that he had a realistic plan. And in summer 2014, I believe that the power had a plan how to solve this problem, but there were other circumstances. There was foreign intrusion, and that led to Ilovaisk and other issues. And I do not think that I, as an expert, could blame the president that he didn't solve this problem. Show me who can solve this problem under these conditions. Maybe, in this case, I would change my mind. About lack of alternatives. We will have an alternative during presidential elections. The elections will be competitive. And what my colleagues meant, and they explained it to you, I will bring one example. The main competitor is Yulia Vladimirovna Tymoshenko. According to the ratings, they have the same ratings. someone says someone. So the style of Tymoshenko and the program is nearly the same, and one leg is in the past and one leg is in the future. And maybe the colleagues feel more threat concerning Tymoshenko. They believe that Poroshenko has more wish to listen to the advice of our international colleagues and more wish to move ahead. And Yulia Vladimirovna will build more Soviet-like system. And there are such concerns. And you know that this is the main alternative, and people have to choose between Poroshenko and Tymoshenko, and we will discuss it during second year and in 2019, the year of elections, concerning Donbass and the conflict in the east of Ukraine. So let's be realistic. When Poroshenko promised this, he had some plans and maybe some illusions that he will be able to resolve this issue soon. And he tried to do it. A lot of territories of Donbass were freed. And when direct interference of Russia happened, we lacked resources in our armed forces, and also we had weak army and weak institutions. But the main, we should be honest. You know that Poroshenko or someone else, they cannot resolve this conflict. This is utopia. The resolution of this conflict depends on Russia. Change of Russian position, or change of rule in Russia, or readiness for compromises. Russia is the side of the of this conflict. Until Russia is ready to stop this conflict, it will continue. So the main is relative result. The stability, there is a balance of forces in the east. There are positive trend in defense capabilities of the country, and there are a lot of problems as well. There is corruption in defense industry and other issues. I would like to say about the problem of the future concerning the president. Last month, the president started to negotiate with some hardcore patriots and nationalists, and this is it can. There is some risk for the president on this. He was a moderate politician who tried to search the balance, and here he went along this road, and what the problem is. And we see it during 9th of May, and some response to Russian social media. The conflict between the nationalists and patriots who do not want compromises with Russia. They want full breach of relations with Russia. And other people say that we should have peace and no conflict with Russia at any price. Or some people say that we should find some painful compromises. And these are two different poles. So this is the problem for president as well. So there is a position between these main positions, and this is a factor for internal destabilization. And the country should stay united in the face of Russian aggression, and we should be realistic. There won't be a quick solution to this conflict, and no president of Ukraine can do this because there is a factor of Russia. And the international community should pressure Russia, and the president efficiently supports and helps in this.
The time of our meeting has exhausted. If the time of our meeting has exhausted, if you have any questions, then please come over. I hope that in a year we will meet, and I hope that next time the scores will be more positive, and these scores more positive will mean more positive activity, for which we all hope. Thank you very much. This is the end of the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. Thank you.